Hey everybody, welcome back. So today we're with Sarah. Hi Sarah. And we're going to be talking about how to win government contracts in the construction space. So Sarah, you obviously, do a lot of work in this space. One of our main key drivers of the business in SAS-GPS is working with government contracts in the construction space, right? So we are very fine-tuned with it. We've won multiple billions of dollars or lots of billions of dollars in the
Yes.
construction space, right? So I just want to start off with the question that probably everybody's asking for because, as you know, business owners are watching this. People in the C-suite are watching this, right? How much does it cost to win a government contract in the construction space?
Well, there's a lot of different factors in cost. One of them is time. And then if you are hiring a company like SAS-GPS or a similar proposal writing company of quality and, kind of win rate, right? Like not just somebody who's promising you that they can write you like 5 proposals for $1,500.
Right.
I would say that the average construction proposal is probably running you around 10 grand. It can be more or less. It is incredibly solicitation by solicitation dependent. So each solicitation has a series of requirements that you have to answer and that you have to write to, and the length of that determines the level of effort, which determines your cost.
Right.
At SAS-GPS, we give firm fixed price not to exceed estimates, so you know exactly what your proposal is going to cost once we look at it for you, and then you can decide to go from there. But a lot of companies are going to give you sort of a time and materials where the hours just keep racking up, and I think you can expect that it's going to be at least several $1,000s.
Yeah. No, for sure. And I think that's a good start, right? Because we don't want to, we don't want to. There's a lot of videos on YouTube where it's like, make your first $100,000 with, 3 solicitations, right? And the reality of that is possible for like this many people, right?
It's not impossible, but you need some startup funds. You're not going to make that off of zero
Yeah,
unless you are an excellent proposal writer and you can also run your business at the same time.
yeah, exactly. No, for sure.
So a lot of it's just a time thing, and everybody's time is worth money, right? So we're here to help so that people can do the thing that they're good at, which is run their business, and we can help win you more business.
Absolutely. No, love it. All right, so let's take a step back from that, right? We already, we talked about costs. We have, people have probably left the video now that, that don't like
Yeah,
that,
that's
right?
okay.
Which is okay, right? Because we want to be realistic with everybody, right?
Mhm.
But what are the most effective ways to find government contracts in the construction space?
So the first thing is that you have to sort of learn how to set up your pipeline. And in the federal contracting space, most construction proposals, not all of them, but most of them, come and will be posted on sam.gov.
Sure.
So learning how to search and save your searches on sam.gov and giving that ample time, I think we have a video on that for people.
Yep.
And then to save yourself time in searching for these, also learning how to quickly read through those proposals to see if you can be compliant and calculate a rough probability of win. And if your rough probability of win is like a 0, then don't even read anymore, right? So kind of coming up with the flow of going through those solicitations that you're finding on sam.gov. If you're not looking at federal, if you're looking at state and local things, there's a whole host of different platforms that you're going to have to find depending on the state and your locality, and each department within the state sometimes, and certainly each like local entity has its own procurement process and its own procurement portal and the way it puts things out. So if you're doing state and local, you need to be very geographically specific, and then do some research and figure out where it is that you need to be looking.
Yeah, no, for sure. What about set asides? Because we hear all the time people ask us, right? Like, what set asides should I be getting? When should I be getting them? What does that entail, and how does that play into like winning and
Yeah, so set-asides are incredibly important. If you're looking at solicitations and you're a small business, right, you probably aren't going to win a construction contract that's full and open against some of these giant businesses, right? If you're a giant business, awesome. We are also here to help you. But if you're a small business, you need to be looking at the small business set-asides. And then if you can get an additional certification from the SBA, let's say HubZone, 8A, SDVOSB, although SDVOSB is primarily for really good for if you're trying to do work in the VA space. Those open doors to exclusive opportunities that have been set aside for that group, so you lower your competition level, and then you have a higher probability of win, right? Because people are like you that are bidding instead of multi-billion-dollar companies.
Yeah, no, absolutely, right.
Um,
What about like leveraging government assistance programs? What are like how can somebody,
So
starting
most of
out?
those set asides, right? Most of those set asides are certified by the SBA. So the SBA is a government entity that you already pay taxes for, right? And that you're already funding the SBA. So I always encourage people to contact their local small business administration. Um, if your local small business administration doesn't do you right, contact the next one over in a city over, because most everything is done virtual now. And they can help you figure out how to work, how to get those certifications, how your local market might look. They can help you set up mentor protege programs. The SBA is quite large. And so, but it's where you kind of want to get started, and they may refer you to somewhere else. The SBA has excellent resources on their website.
Yeah, gotcha. And I think for the people that are starting out, right? Because I mean, there's a lot of that on YouTube, right? Like I mentioned before, there's a lot of videos out there that are like, hey, how to win your first contract, how to win your first $10,000, $100,000, right, in government space. What do you recommend for them to do when they're starting out, right? Because I see it. We've had meetings before where you recommend people start as a subcontractor. So how would you like? How does that work?
So it completely depends on what your past performance looks like, right? If you have no past performance, you're definitely going to want to come up with probably some strategies to get some past performance. Some solicitations will let you do your private past performance. So if you have private past performance, that can work really well for you. Maybe you don't need a teaming partner, then you find the right solicitation. But if you don't have any past performance, you got to go try to win something probably somewhere other than the federal space, or come in as a subcontractor or a teaming partner or a JV or something, because most of the federal government and most of the state governments as well are going to require that you have past performance. It's going to be
Right.
how they make sure that you can do the job that they're contracting you to do. And if you don't have any, then you're not eligible, really, ultimately, right? So figuring out how to get that past performance, I would say, if you have questions about it, attend the industry events. That's a good networking place. Attend pre-bid conferences where you can ask questions of those contracting officers, or maybe meet other people that are in that space. And maybe they're looking for a subcontractor, right? Or at least you can get some more information. So like
Right.
information gathering is a big part of government contracting.
Absolutely. No, I think that's 100% true, right? Now, like once people get through that phase of like they have past performance, they have money to spend, so they can actually win a contract, right? The next hurdle, I guess, that you see in the space is like the bonding and like the financial stability of the business to actually work with the government, right? So talk us
Right.
through that, because I feel like that's a shock to a lot of people.
So especially in construction, there's going to be requirements on your financials. Sometimes they're going to ask for audited financials, right? Or at least certified from an accountant, financials. So you have to have your financials in order. And then they're going to ask you to be able to have a bond. The bond capacity will vary. And the types of bonds that they're going to ask for will vary from solicitation to solicitation, but you need to be capable of getting a bond. And sometimes that takes a little bit of time. So you kind of want to do that ahead of time. Like it's good to get your company like pre-certified for a bond, so you know how much that bond's going to be, because that's a really good way to search through your solicitation possibilities as well. Because if you're only bonded for $1 million and they want you to be bonded for $2 million, and you can't get bonded for $2 million, you really can't do this project.
Right. Yeah, no,
Um,
100%. Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's different kinds of bonds. I think maybe we make a video later that talks about the different kinds of construction bonds for everyone.
Yeah, no, for sure, 100%. And I think it's just to reiterate that point, right? I think it's important for people to understand, like, no matter how good your past performance is, if you don't have the bond that the government wants, you will not win that contract.
And most construction contracts are going to be over the 150,000 mark, and so a performance and payment bond are going to be mandatory because
Yeah,
it's the law. So you're not
100%.
going to find a lot of them that aren't going to have bonds. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing too is like, like compliance with labor laws and regulations. So how does that play into like, you have money, you have the bond, then this is like almost like the closing statement, right, to like helping win the contract. How does that work?
So I think my hope would be that all companies are following labor laws and regulations if they have money and have enough to get a bond. But you can look up the Davis-Bacon Act so you understand the prevailing wages that the government's going to mandate for you. That also helps with your pricing, and pricing is really important, right? Make sure that you're following OSHA, sustainability laws, like all of those things, and that you have the necessary like licenses and things especially if you're doing state and local that can be a little bit confusing. So you need to do your research and make sure that you get that. But the labor laws and regulations they're consistent across, what you should be doing anyway. But if you're working for the federal government, they will check that you are paying your people according to those wage requirements. Yeah.
No, for sure, 100%. So that aside, you have everything you need to to potentially win this bid, right? Then the following question that a lot of CFOs ask is, or the CEO per se, right, is, how do I make this competitive? How do I stand out in 2025 with my construction bid? If obviously.
My answer for everybody always when they ask about how to win a government solicitation is pricing. It is not the only thing. You don't necessarily, depending on the type of contract, right, that's being offered, the type of bid that's out there, it's not always the biggest factor, but it is always a factor. So pricing, realistic, competitive pricing is a big deal. I talk to people every day and they say that, for me to be able to bid what the, incumbent contract is charging, I would have to take like a 2% overhead, and that's all that I'm making. Yeah. The reason that solicitations exist and that the bidding process is for competition, and the government wants to spend as little money as possible, which as a taxpayer, I appreciate, and so they're going to look at what's the best value for the price. But your solicitation matters on those best value contracts, because if you come in close on price, they're going to start looking at what are your plans? How is your company running, right? And all those specific things that we put in those solicitation responses are what will win you if you have competitive pricing.
Yeah. Gotcha. Right. And I think that, let's put realistic expectations of people, right? Private sector, typical markup, maybe 30, 60% sometimes, right?
Depends, but yeah.
Right.
Like retail, is higher, right? So then, let's say construction,
Right.
But yeah, sometimes we've seen people. We bid one where it was about 6%, that we were going to be making, and we lost to somebody who was willing to make 4.5%.
Yeah. So I think that's important to take into consideration, right? Because if you financially can't survive as a company with that percentage, maybe don't bid.
Well, or you're just gonna you're going to be wasting the money and the time that you spent preparing that bid. So doing research on the solicitation, especially if it's a continuing solicitation, right? If hey, this has been won by somebody before, let's figure out how much that contract was worth. And most contracting information is available if you know how to do the research, because it is public information. So you can kind of figure out how much did the last people do it for, and did they do a good job at that price? Because sometimes they didn't, right? And that's an argument you can make. So it's really so specific for each opportunity, right? So you can't, it's not like just throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. Kind of, you want to be intentional, especially, remember you're spending money on this, right? So you don't want to spend money, you want to spend your money on the right things, not just anything.
Right, exactly.
And that's one of the things that we help here, is that if we don't think that you can win, or we don't, if we're like, oh, this one's a long shot for you, or the research that we pulled shows that this is going to go to the incumbent or something, we'll let you know. Our ROI strategy here at SAS-GPS is about you winning, because then you come back, we write more, we win, and then we have this nice, beautiful ROI circle that keeps going. And so we want you to put your money where it counts.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I think that's one of the things that makes us quite different from everybody else, is we don't just take it just because we can, right?
Yeah, that's especially with our competitors who are of similar sort of quality and experience. A lot of them are just going to give you they're going to say, oh, you have a project? Excellent. Here's a list of resumes, pick a writer, right? And we're going to do a completely different process. We're going to look and say okay, let us learn a little bit about your business. Oh, okay, let us look at this solicitation. Is this a good match for you? And then kind of communicate with you that way. And that doesn't mean we don't close as much business as just saying yes all the time, but we have a very good win rate.
Yeah. And I think that's, I appreciate that more, to be honest with you.
We like to do business right here at SAS-GPS. Yeah. It's not just pure capitalism.
Absolutely. So let's talk about a little bit more about proven experience and sustainability and technology, right? Because I feel like a lot of construction companies, they're not the most companies are not the most technologically savvy, right? just because the space doesn't require it to be. But if you are, you want to explain how that could be a plus?
Okay, yeah. So with technology, there is a lot of technology that can go into construction, especially if you have an engineering side of that construction project. Building information modeling, AI-driven project tracking, you know, those things sort of have become the norm. And I think that using smart technology in your business and in your proposals, like showing that you are more efficient this way, that you have better cost control, that it can help you with safety, right? There's so many different areas that you can apply this, and it just kind of gives you that like strategic edge, that like that winning, like kind of like it's like a cherry on top. Like, so it's a good idea to look at like those technologies and innovations, because then you can kind of get a leg up on your competition sometimes that way.
Yep.
In terms of like sustainability, compliance, sustainability is sort of changing a little bit right now, but we always think it's good if you have LEED certifications, or you're using renewable energy or eco-friendly materials, that those are still pluses for your proposal. They're not going to hurt you. And then obviously the Buy America Act is going to be a big part of it. Like, there's a lot of emphasis, especially in construction right now, on like American steel, not Chinese steel, things like that, right?
Right.
So you're making sure that you're sourcing your materials from America.
Absolutely. Right. And I guess the last part, I mean, and this is kind of obvious, but sometimes it's not as obvious to people, coming into the space because they're not experts and they don't look at these things every single day. The organization and like the professional side of making the proposal look good for the person reading it on the other side, right? Do you want to talk us through a little bit about how that works?
Yes. So I would think, like, when I see people writing their own proposals who don't have any proposal experience, you can tell. And mostly because it's, they're not in the right order or they're missing compliance things. I think that's a big part of it. So you want to make sure that the RFP, IFB, whatever it is that you're bidding on, has a structure that they're asking for. That structure is not necessarily clear because these documents are wildly wandering and long. But that's kind of where we come in, right? This is our job and we're used to looking at them every day. So following that format precisely, right? Because you want to do they want to do a side-by-side comparison. Basically, like, think of them that they have a rubric, right? And that rubric is formatted to that RFP. And if they have to go hunting, well, was that on, I don't know, do they put this at the beginning? Do they put this at the end? They have to go hunting for the information to fill out your rubric. They're going to already have like you're going to get less points, right? Because you're already just being kind of irritating, or they could just disqualify you. Because they don't have time for that. So you got to put it in the right order. You got to be clear. You got to be concise, and you want to try to be as error-free as possible. And then just be really clear. Outline your staffing, outline your materials, outline your project schedule. Really, the more details, right, that you have, the better chance that you have of winning. Period.
Right.
Always. Yeah.
Absolutely. Right. So I guess this leads to like the next area, right? Like, what role does networking with contract officers, prime contractors, procurement officers play in this contracting space?
Yeah. So I always think networking is a good idea. Right now, time for networking, resources for networking, those are a little harder to come by for a lot of people, but they're kind of essential, right? Like, your business development plan needs to have some of that in it. Contracting officers can come and go sometimes, but a lot of times they're going to be the same. So if you're trying to work in a very specific space, you'll see that contracting officer over and over again. So when you show up at a pre-bid conference or an agency event, right, being nice, giving them your materials, a lot of times we'll see, especially at industry events, that people are quite helpful. Like, oh, I think I know one that would fit your business, right? And they'll actually kind of like lead you to solicitations that they think that you can win. And that's like really invaluable. And if they, that's a pretty solid networking place. But it's not always as easy because the government does have to keep a distance, right? Like a professional distance, as we would want them to, so that there's not favoritism in things. So you also want to network with the other companies around you, like people that you could subcontract with, right? Like, or people maybe that you could subcontract with you, larger firms, sometimes smaller firms, maybe a firm that has a set aside that you don't have, right? So that you can get into, put a joint venture together or whatever and get into an area that maybe you couldn't bid on otherwise. So I always say like industry events are really key. If they have a meeting about a solicitation, really try to go to that meeting. If it's a site visit, lots of site visits for constructions, go to the site visit, and if you've come in after the site visit, it doesn't mean you can't bid and it doesn't mean you can't win, right? But try to get on top of it so that you get to the site visit, especially because remember, I just said like 8 times probably, specific plans win, right? And it's hard to make a specific plan if you haven't been to the site a lot of the time, right? And then sometimes they don't have site visits, but then you're in the same boat as everybody, right? So you don't want other people to have a competitive advantage over you because they walk to the site and they understand some of the things that are happening there and you don't.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think that, for a business that's growing, I think networking is super, super important, right? Especially if you want to subcontract and get on the radar of these bigger companies that, are actively looking for subcontractors.
And again, I say go to the SBA website or contact your local SBA. They can help you find networking events. They can help introduce you to other potential partners in your area. And again, the SBA primarily works for free, right? So if somebody's, telling you that you need to pay for all of the stuff that the SBA can offer, you should be super suspicious.
Yeah, no, for sure. 100%. All right. So then, talking about joint ventures, because there's a lot of people, who are in that space, who are winning, they've won one contract or they've won 3 contracts, right? And they haven't won a contract maybe in like the last couple of years, or they haven't won a contract of the value that the government wants them to win to be able to win that specific, to go and bid on something, right?
Right.
How important is it to do teaming, joint ventures, subcontracting in this space?
I think it's essential at some point, probably. I mean, you could probably get through without it ever, but you're gonna struggle more, right? And it's gonna be a longer process. But there are pros and cons, right? There's some companies that if you subcontract out with them, they're brutal, and you're not gonna make as much money, but you get started, right? So you kind of have to again, it's like that business development plan, like where do I start and where do I want to be and how do I get there? And teaming, joint ventures, and subcontracting are keys in government contracting, especially with construction, because maybe they're going to have some strange parts of the construction, like maybe you don't really do a lot of asphalt, right? And maybe they have an asphalt thing, so you need a subcontractor. So making those connections so that you have all the little parts already lined up. So you don't want to try to line them up once the solicitation comes out and you've got 3 weeks to get all this written, because you have to get your subcontractors information, right? Mm-hmm. And we have to write to your subcontractors information as well. And so you can't be calling looking for subcontractors, being I can't find one. Oh, I finally found one. Now they have to have time to respond. And then, you've got 36 hours to get all the subcontractor information into your proposal. I mean, it happens, and we'll do the best that we can. We'll do a good job, but it certainly makes a better product if you have those things lined up.
Yeah. Oh, 100% for sure. All right, Sarah. So now we're going to talk about the challenges and pitfalls of the construction space. Woohoo! So what are the biggest challenges that construction firms face when it comes to working with the government?
Ooh, the most compliance issues, pricing, winning contracts. It's a competitive space. Bonding, getting the right insurance. So there's, making sure that all your paperwork's in place. Sometimes you might be really good at building a building, but not as good at paperwork, and that's again why we're here. Yeah. I would say compliance issues are a big one, right? So make sure that you're following the wage and the labor laws, making sure that you're paying your workers according to the federal standards, maintain accurate records of your payroll, make sure that you conduct internal audits and that you verified everybody's classification and you've done all of those things. Make sure that you are following the Buy America, Buy American Act, right? So that you're not dependent on foreign materials when suddenly a solicitation just says, nope, you're going to be using these and then you can't source the materials that you need. Make sure you're following safety things, obviously. And I always tell people in your proposals, pictures go a long way. but you never want a picture where you don't look like you're in safety compliance. Like, don't have somebody on site not wearing a hard hat, right? Because you don't want to look like you don't follow safety things, even if it really wasn't a big deal because it's just a photo shoot or something, right? So safety and compliance issues, regular safety training, that you're investing in those things, that you're inspecting, right? And then pay attention for, subcontracting goals as well. Make sure that you have those, like, especially at the state level. There's a lot of goals where they're saying, like, hey, we need to have 20% of this contract be, disadvantaged, minority owned, SWOSB, or some kind of set aside, subcontracted. And so you need to have 20% of your business going to those people in that particular state. So there's just some different things to look at there.
Yeah. All right. So last two questions for you, my friend, because I know your time is very valuable. What are some common reasons that people fail and lose bids when it comes to the construction space?
Okay. Pricing. I think, failing to have competitive pricing ready to go is a big one. Doing their cost estimation up front, giving data-driven, detailed cost estimates that meet all the requirements, I think, is a big one. Also, straight up failure to read the solicitation carefully. We got a client that came in who was like, we can't write our own bids anymore. We keep not being compliant on the stupidest little things, right? Like, they said we had to have steel barrels, and we didn't specify that our barrels were steel. We were disqualified. Like, everything is about compliance. You have to read it really carefully. You have to ensure that you are meeting every line, every tiny piece of that scope of work, your bonding, your insurance, your past performance, right? If you ignore the proposal format or the evaluation criteria, then you will just be probably disqualified. So even if you had the best pricing and we wrote you the best proposal ever, if you just, if we wrote it, we're not going to be non-compliant. But if you wrote a really good proposal, but you just left a piece of it out, a lot of times they just won't, there's just nothing that you can do about that.
Yeah, for sure.
And then I would say weak past performance documentation. You want to have your references, you want to have your, your reviews, your CPARs, if that's relevant. And just make sure that you really have those projects that they're asking for of a similar size and scope. And that if they're kind of close, or you're kind of like moving, because not everything's going to be perfect, that you have the right narrative written so that they understand how this project applies. And that's really kind of an art in and of itself, is being able to talk about your past performance projects and how they specifically relate to this particular opportunity.
Yep. No, 100%.
And then right. If you don't turn it in on time, you can't even be 30 seconds late.
Yeah, that'll do it. All right. And then last question for you, my friend, before we let you go here and getting back to helping the team. Obviously, like, there's large corporations in the United States that do construction bids for the government, and they're behemoths of the industry, right? How does a small, I looked up words today. How does a small and mid-sized company compete with those people?
Well, your set-asides, right, is a big one. Make sure that you're just not going against them. They can't go and bid on those small businesses, although remember, they can still make joint ventures and teams, and they can subcontract things, right? So maybe you want to have relationships with them too, right? Where you get in on their projects. But yeah, stay in that small business range. Like, it might be the perfect one for you. You might be like, this is right in my backyard. This is the best. Like, I know exactly what to do. But the truth is that small businesses a lot of times have to run a little bit more overhead than those large businesses, right? Because they're doing so much more quantity than a small business, that sometimes you just can't compete on pricing, and oftentimes can't compete on resources. So you just want to kind of stay away from those places where you're competing directly with them.
Yeah.
That's my big, or like I said, become their friend.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Right. And I think one of the things that you mentioned to me is the niche, right? Like, specialize in a niche that might be more favorable when, like, the contracting offer is looking at it, versus like company who does construction for dams, something of that nature.
Well, and there are very specific construction projects, right? It might just be like fencing, or it might be, construction of, like boilers, like, kind of things that have a little bit more technical, it's not all just like building a building, right? Construction
Yeah.
is a very, what, maybe you're constructing oil pipelines, right? Like, so construction is a big industry. And you do want to sort of have and understand your niche, and then do well in that niche, right? Do a good job, like commit, like you don't want to be like, well, I did a little of this. I did one of these projects. I did one of these projects. I did one of these projects. You're not going to get those 3 relevant past performances, right? So you really want to kind of find your area and focus on doing that area well.
Yeah, no, for sure, 100%. All right, my friend. Well, I'll let you go. Any final thoughts before you hop off?
I guess my final thoughts would be, if you have questions, feel free to give us a call and we can help. And if we can't help, maybe we can direct you. And again, your SBA is a good resource, and then getting with those like networking places are also really good places to ask questions, right? So it's good places to start, is finding the resources that you need to help you.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, thanks, Yoel. Have a great day.